The Hague Initiative for International
A
Cooperation.
very important
And almost every language
Israel
other than
Institute of New
English and
Zealand.
My
French.
roots come from Jerusalem.
Hi, I'm Ashley Church with the Israel Institute of New Zealand. I'm here again today with Dr. David Cumin, a fellow director of the Institute, and this is the Israel Report. And David, we've got a couple of important topics today. The first one was the recent tweet by Green MP Golriz Ghahraman, where she was implying that Jesus was, in fact, she wasn't implying, she was basically saying that Jesus was in fact a Palestinian, and by inference, his mum and dad, Joseph and Mary, were also Palestinians, and I guess the whole family. That's an offensive thing to say. It's offensive to Christians, obviously. It's offensive to Jews. And it's offensive not just in a faith sense in respect of their various beliefs in what Christians refer to as the Bible and what Jews refer to as the Torah, but it's also offensive because it's historically and archaeologically incorrect. It's simply not true. Your handle on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's the fact that it's a lie makes it so wrong. And there's an added layer to it. It's not just a lie. It's a lie that started in 135 CE when the Romans renamed the area of Israel Syria Palestina. And why did the Romans do this? Why did the Romans change the name of an entire area?
To eradicate the reference to the...
Exactly.
Yeah.
They did it to get rid of the idea that Jews are indigenous to Israel. They got rid of it they changed the name to try and tell future generations that there was no such thing as the Jews.
Yep.
And this is exactly the same effect that Golriz tweeting that Mary and Joseph were Palestinian refugees has. It completely ignores the history, not only ignores it, but perpetuates the bad aspects of history.
So do you think she would know that? I mean, she must be aware of the history of that reference. Do you think that she would know? And indeed, anybody who's perpetrating this lie would actually know it? Or is this just simply an act of ignorance on the part of the people who say these things?
Oh, in many ways, I'd like to think that it was ignorance.
Act of ignorance?
But this came very shortly after an American Democrat tweeted that Jesus was a Palestinian refugee.
Yep.
A very similar thing going on. It seems implausible that Golriz would not have been following those politics. And if she had been, the storm that came after it, the amount of responses that the American Democrat got for her lie, it seems implausible that
she wouldn't know.
She wouldn't have seen that.
So this is an agenda. This is a deliberate strategy designed to what?
Well, if it's deliberate or if it's not deliberate, the effect is the same. The effect is saying Jews are not indigenous to the land. We're going to rewrite history. We're going to take away all of the archaeological evidence, the anthropological evidence. We're going to take away the genetic evidence. And we're going to do the same thing that the Romans tried to do in 135 CE. We're going to whitewash the Jewish history. And it's the same effect that the statement she made last year about Israel committing genocide, which is another complete and utter lie. Both in the intent, given the IDF does so much to protect civilians, and the facts on the ground that the Palestinian population has been increasing over time and their quality of life is some of the highest in the Arab world. These lies that are perpetuated have the same effect of undermining the state of Israel, of trying to destroy a national home of the Jewish people, and of whitewashing history.
Now, I suppose my big concern about this, and it's true of all fake news, if you like, in respect of both of those things, is that it starts out as a statement made by one or two people, and then it gains traction and a few more people believe it, and it starts to find its way into the narrative. And then eventually, this kind of thing finds its way into universities and into the mainstream, and it just simply becomes something that people believe, whether it's true or not. And for me, that's the really insidious part of this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. To give her some credit, though, Golriz, this time when the media contacted her, offered a form of apology.
Apparently.
And so there is a little bit of a stopgap here, given that the media had contacted her about it. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that the more that lies are repeated, the more that people will start to believe them. And that's, I think, a big reason of why we're doing what we're doing, is to point out the lies, to give some facts, and to say, let's think about what we're doing. Let's hold our elected leaders to account, and let's put the truth out there.
Now, the other topic I want to talk to you about today was references coming out of Palestine that a Palestinian citizen is taking a case against the Palestinian Authority because he has a daughter who requires treatment, and the Palestinian Authority is refusing to pay for that treatment. Now, to put that into some context, the world community provides quite significant financial support to Palestine, has done for a very long period of time. And they give that generally, I think, in the expectation that that's going to be provided for medicine, food, education, and a whole range of other things that are about the social provision and social welfare of the people that live in that part of the world. And so I guess the concern is that a significant portion of that's being used for things like providing support for the family of martyrs, providing support for terrorists who are currently residing in prison, and rather than, to be fair, not all of it obviously, but rather than that money going to what I think the world community expects it to go to, which is actually providing for the people of Palestine and for their welfare. View on that?
Yeah, it's a tragic story. This is a father who's seeing his child suffering, and there is a life-saving treatment available in Israel. The Palestinian Authority in the past has funded things like that to be able to support, but have said no, we're not going to invest in your child. They claim they don't have the money.
Right.
And what you brought up is exactly the real sadness of this, is that the Palestinian Authority spends about $400 million a year on murderers.
That's absurd.
On Palestinian Arabs that have gone out and killed Jews, whether they're in prison or, like you said, to their families if they were killed in the act. And that money is something that they've refused to give up. The United States government has signed a piece of legislation saying they will not provide money as long as this pay-for-slay policy continues. And unfortunately, it's the Palestinians that are suffering.
Now that's actually a really important topic because it segues quite nicely into a video that we're going to be introducing in a few moments, which is your good self, talking about terrorism in one of the series of videos that we've been putting together over the last few months. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that in a few moments' time. But just before we do that, just worth reminding people watching today that they can access the Israel Institute's website, israelinstitute.nz. They can watch these videos at their leisure, and they can also access the other resources the Institute makes available.
Absolutely, israelinstitute.nz, and sign up to our newsletter as well, and then you won't miss anything.
Fantastic. And so now we're going to have a look at your video. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Let's have a look at that now.
In 2016, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said it was human nature for Arab Palestinians to murder Israeli civilians due to the occupation. A number of other commentators have excused or explained away Palestinian terrorism as being a consequence of poverty, but neither of these excuses for terror are correct. Is Arab-Palestinian terrorism inevitable, or are some on the pro-Palestinian side giving violence against civilians a free pass? Thankfully, we have plenty of studies and evidence to counter both Ban Ki-moon and anyone who presents these false assertions. The argument that poverty leads young people to participate in acts of terror is a prevalent theory, but the evidence almost exclusively points in the opposite direction. A 2007 study found that both higher education and standards of living were positively associated with participation in terror groups like Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, along with the choice to become a suicide bomber. In other words, the more well-off a person was, the more likely they were to participate in terror. So if not the desperation of poverty, what is driving predominantly middle-class people towards acts of terror? Interviews with would-be suicide bombers and other research suggests the answer is religious incitement and a culture of glorifying martyrs. In areas ruled by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, imams will often incite violence in their sermons. Outside the mosques, street signs, football clubs, and even schools are named after suicide bombers or are dedicated to the memory of terrorists. In schools, the curriculum further normalizes and encourages terror, with stories told that are entitled, "I shall sacrifice my blood to saturate the land," and religious textbooks, replete with genocidal messages, are taught to children. And state-sponsored children's television bombards the youngest and most impressionable minds with messages of violence against Jews. There's also good evidence that false charges of Israeli atrocities and instigation from mosque leaders played an important role in starting the First Intifada. Over that 4 bloody years that followed, more than 1,400 Israeli civilians and 1,700 Israeli soldiers were injured or murdered in the violence. The Second Intifada, also known as the Al-Aqsa Intifada, lasted from 2000 to 2005 and was ignited not by poverty, but by a visit of Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to Judaism's holiest site, the Temple Mount. That visit was then exploited by then Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, and Palestinian violence claimed approximately 1,000 Israeli lives over the next 5 years. many of whom were murdered in horrific suicide attacks, on buses, at a pizza restaurant, and in a queue outside a nightclub. The so-called knife intifada, where 38 Israelis were murdered and almost 600 injured in a 10-month period in 2016, was also started with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas spreading the false claim that Jews intended to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. During this time, Palestinian sources published practical guides on how to stab Jews and handed out candy whenever a Jew was murdered. In many cases, the attackers themselves explained their motivation on social media, not poverty, but saying they were acting to defend the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It had nothing to do with human nature or poverty. But finances do play a role, though not the one you would expect. The Palestinian Authority provides salaries to terrorists. Dubbed the pay-for-slay policy, terrorists or their families can earn more than policemen and their families if they kill Jews. And the Palestinian Authority relies on the money for most of its budget from aid. This is one of the reasons the United States cut their donations. But other democratic countries continue to essentially spend taxpayer money on terror. It doesn't matter how apologists spin it, there is no excuse for terror. And as previous UK Prime Minister David Cumin said, if you say violence in London is not justified, but suicide bombs in Israel are a different matter, then you are part of the problem. So the next time you hear excuses or arguments for Palestinian terror, set the person straight. Terrorism is a matter of ideology, and there can be no peace in Israel as long as the Arab Palestinian leaders continue to promote an ideology of hate and violence. I'm Dr. David Cumin for the Israel Institute of New Zealand. The Hague Initiative for International
A
Cooperation.
very important
Almost every language
the Israel
other than
Institute of New
English
Zealand.
and
My
French.
roots come from Jerusalem.